Hello everybody, welcome to episode 104 of Show Fever. Today we'll be going over the Vinland Sagas. Now, this is not to be misconstrued with Vinland Saga, which is phenomenal and you absolutely should read. I would 100% recommend it. It is literally one of the best mangas of all time. But yeah, we're actually going over the stories that it is based over, and that is the Vinland Sagas. Now, these are a pair of Norse, not really Norse, but Viking sagas about the early Viking exploration of North America. Because actually, if you didn't know, prior to 1492, when Christopher Columbus sailed the big old ocean blue and whenever landed in Cuba, the Vikings actually landed in North America around modern day Canada and areas such as Newfoundland, Prince Edward's Island, what should we call it? Crap. Why am I forgetting? Labrador, that area of Canada. But yeah, and they did this in around not first century, but 10th and 11th century AD. Yeah, so here we have the Penguin Classics cover, so you have a map there of the known world at the time, then just a regular old spine, you can't see it really well because of the lighting, but yeah, and then you got the back. But this book was honestly phenomenal. I was not expecting it at all to be as good as it was, but I'll just kind of get into the plot real quick. So, it's divided into two sagas specifically. Now, they tell relatively the same story, but there are some differences that you will notice. Now, the first part is called the Saga of Greenlanders, and the second part is called Eric the Red Saga. So I'll go over the Saga of Greenlanders first, and I'll just kind of mention some stuff that is in Eric the Red Saga that isn't in the Greenlanders once I get to Eric the Red Saga. But yeah, so the Saga of Greenlanders discusses how, it really discusses the Greenlanders. It discusses how Eric the Red was one of the first settlers in Greenland. He had a son by the name of Leif Erikson, and then he had two other sons, Thorvald and Thorstein, which were all Eriksson because they were the son of Eric. But yeah, so we see this, and during this time, after he lands, a sailor by the name of Bjarni ends up traveling around the western coast of Greenland, and in that area he ends up seeing multiple islands that are in the far distance and multiple lands, and he comes back and reports this, and this gets Leif intrigued, so he ends up going, or Leif Erikson, however you want to say, I'm going to say Leif, even though it's not Leif. That's what most people refer to him as. But he ends up going and he lands on this newfound land. He didn't actually land in Newfoundland. He landed around. I believe he didn't necessarily. He landed in Vinland, and Vinland is presumed to be Prince Edward's Island. But yeah, he went around, explored, did all that. His voyage was pretty successful. He ultimately ended up coming back and just telling stories of this. Now, on his way back, he actually ran upon a crashed ship with 15 surviving crew members, and this is where he acquired the title of Leif the Lucky. But yeah, so he ends up coming back and spreading the word. So then his brother, Thorvald, who is married to a woman by the name of Gudrid, it's Gudrid, yeah, so Gudrid. And he's married to this woman, and he ends up going on a voyage to Vinland. And during this, he ultimately ends up landing, and here they kind of have relatively successful voyage. However, once they land, they actually start encountering the natives, because Leif didn't actually, it's not stated that he originally encountered the natives. However, Thorvald has a bigger problem. He starts encountering them. Now, ultimately, they get to fight and skirmishing and stuff, and ultimately, not any of the actual Greenlanders are wounded besides Thorvald. Thorvald is shot in the side. He has been buried at Crosophanes in North America, because he died there and he just wanted to be buried near a church. That's why they had constructed a church, because they did some minor building around the area while Leif was there and while Thorvald was there. But ultimately, they end up going back, and during this time, Gudrid ends up marrying Thorstein, who was Thorvald's brother. And then Thorstein's like, you know what? I want to go on a trip as well. So he ends up going on a trip to Vinland, and here they end up doing such as more development and stuff like that, harvesting logs and everything. And however, this time it is not the natives which use them, it is a sickness. And the sickness begins to spread throughout the camp and all of that. And many people get it. Gudrid actually does not get it. And we see as Thorstein the Black, who, it's never really stated how he got there. I presume he's probably a leftover from Thorvald's previous voyage or Leif's. So we see Thorstein the Black, and he kind of is a intermediary. His wife actually ends up dying due to the sickness. So when Thorstein, not the Black, Thorstein Erikson, ultimately ends up getting the virus, he's kind of there to console Gudrid because he's an older man, and Gudrid is obviously a younger woman, so he just wanted to be there, kind of like a father figure to her. But yeah, So ultimately, as I said, Thorstein ends up getting the illness, and he ends up ultimately dying of the illness. Beforehand, he ends up speaking with Gudrid, and he reveals to her fate and how she will be this ancestor of many bishops to come, and how she will live a nice and prosperous life as long as she doesn't marry a Greenlander. Now, after this, we are introduced to the character of Thorfinn Karlsfini. Now, if you've watched or read Vinland Saga, you know who Thorfinn Karlsfini is. But, yeah, so we're introduced to his character, and he is not a Greenlander. He is from, I believe it said he's from Iceland or Norway. I believe it's Iceland. I know in Vinland Saga he's from Iceland. But yeah, so we see this, and ultimately he ends up marrying with Gudrid with the blessing of Eric, who is still alive and living at Brattahlid. It's Brattahlid, yeah. I'm not Norse. I'm not Scandinavian by no means, so I cannot pronounce some of these names. But yeah, so he ends up getting the blessing because he's like, yeah, this is a nice fit, and I would rather have my essentially daughter now marry someone who is of good fit rather than just some bum. But yeah, so Thorfinn is then, because he comes from a relatively rich family, Thorfinn is actually presumed to have been descended from royalty. So we see as he ends up going on this voyage, he goes on, and they have a pretty successful voyage in Vinland. They bring a bull with them, which is actually very integral to the plot. They start developing some agriculture and stuff like that, just developing the land a little bit more, collecting logs and stuff so they can trade them when they get back, and just doing some general tasks. Now, during this time, they actually come in contact with the natives, and they start fighting and all of that. And at one point, the natives end up finding an iron axe, and in this, the dude kills one of his native friends on accident with the axe. And this reportedly tall chieftain sees this, and he's like, no, we're not going to have any of that. I do not like this tool, so he throws it out into the ocean. And there's a different account of this, actually, in Eric the Red Saga. But yeah, so we see that, and ultimately, they end up, though not the Norse, but the Vikings, the Greenlanders, though they have far less troops, they're actually able to outmaneuver the Indians, not Indians, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, the Native Americans, my apologies, I did not mean to use that term, but I got my American school system, got that drove into my head. But yeah, so they ultimately end up getting the Native Americans, and they are able to rout them out, because what they did is they got a bunch of men, they lured them over, and then they released the bull on them, because the Native Americans were scared of the bull because of how aggressive it was, because they encountered it prior, and they're like, oh. But, yeah, so they ultimately end up running off, and then Thorfinn is like, yo, we're leaving, so they ultimately end up leaving and going back to Greenland, where they kind of settle down, and Thorfinn goes back to his farm, which he had already established, and him and Gudrid end up having a life. Also, they had a kid in Vinland. His name was actually the first person to ever be born in North America that of European descent. His name is Snorri. And they just end up going back and having the time building their family a little bit more, and they ultimately have another son by the name of Thorbjorn. And then after that, we see the adventures of Freydis. Now, Freydis is the illegitimate daughter of Eric. Now, Eric is, okay, it is confirmed that Eric had Leif and Thorvald by the same mother, but then Thorstein and Freydis had different mothers. Now, Freydis is a daughter. And Freydis gets the idea, yo, we're going to Vinland. So she ended up going to Vinland with the help of Helgi and Finnbogi. Now, they are a pair of brothers from Norway. And she got their help because they had very nice ships, very large ships and all that. So they ended up going to North America and landing and just doing their thing, kind of developing and all that. But Freydis is a very deceitful woman. So what she does at one point, they land, and Leif had actually promised her to loan out his kind of properties in Finland, even though he wasn't going to go back to him. He could have just let her have them, but he's like, no, I'm going to lend them to you. He did that same thing with Thorfinn. But yeah, so he lends them out, and when she gets there, Helgi and Finnbogi got there before her, and they had already taken kind of camp in that area, and she was like, yo, why'd you all do this? And they're like, well, we got here first, so we just kind of settled down a little bit. But then this kind of leads to a little bit more contention between them, and we see as they kind of interact with and talk about the contention that's between them. But then it progresses along, and one night, she goes and discusses with Finnbogi and Helgi just in the middle of the night. She walks over to there and speaks with them, and she's like, yo, if you will lend me your ships, then I will let you. She was one of their large ships. She's like, if you can lend me your large ships, then we'll let you have all of this area here, and we'll leave you be, because they believed it was a very prosperous land, which it was, and they wanted to stay here and kind of develop it. But then she goes back, gets in the bed, and she has wet and cold feet, and her husband's like, yo, why you got wet and cold feet? Because it wakes him up. And she's like, if you want to bother my husband, I got beat out there by Finnbogi and Helgi. And he's like, what? and ultimately she ends up dishonoring him to the point where he's like, yeah, I gotta go fight and kill him. So he ends up going, he kills and just beats Helgi and Finnbogi, which ultimately end up dying. Then Freydis gets her witch. They get in their Helgi and Finnbogi's boats, and they head back. Now, once they get back, Freydis explains to the other Greenlanders that, they just wanted to stay back there, so that's why we got their boats. They agreed to let us go because they wanted to develop the land a little bit more. However, rumors start to spread, and ultimately Leif gets word of it, and he's like, I'm not the one to do release judgment onto my sister, but she will be punished one day, and generations further after her will be as well. But yeah, so that's kind of where it ends. We kind of get to see as like the generations play out. We see that Thorbjorn and Snorri end up having daughters, and those daughters end up birthing the three bishops in renowned around Greenland and Iceland and stuff like that. So yeah, that's where the Saga of Greenlanders ends. Now, when it comes to Eric the Red Saga, it's not much different. There are small differences. Like, it doesn't really focus a lot on the story of Freydis. It focuses more on the earlier portion of the saga, with Eric the Red kind of landing on Greenland and all of that, and a little bit more on Bjarni and him seeing the islands out there. But yeah, it ends up kind of more discussing like Eric landing on Greenland, having to fight a lot for his land and stuff like that, and then it just kind of tells the same story afterwards. But yeah, one of the bigger differences was, well, not massive difference, but when the Native American found the axe, he just bashed it on a rock and then bashed one of his homies' heads in, and it broke, and he's like, I got no use for this crap since he can't even beat rocks, so he throws it out into the water. I'm trying to think of the other major differences. Oh yeah, Thorvald dies in a different way. He's still shot, but he does die in a different manner in Eric the Red Saga than he does in the Saga of Greenlanders. But yeah, that's all I can really think of a major difference. I know there's a couple more, but like they weren't massive. Like they weren't like absolutely narrative changing. But yeah, so then you get to the glossary of this book and the notes are actually very useful. Like, you get a lot of interesting stuff. You learn about the politics of the Norse, and Greenlander society. You get to see, construction of those ships. You get a full family tree, which is really cool. And you get a lot of maps of just Vinland, their adventures and all that, their travels, what is presumed to be certain locations and stuff like that. There's more maps of different voyages. And at one point you get a diagram of the ships and stuff like that. So yeah, this was really cool. Like, I really enjoyed this book, especially with the Penguins Classics. I got a lot of information because it's only a 50-page read if you're just reading the sagas. However, there's 90 pages worth of extra content with the notes and stuff like that. And it was a very good academic read. And I love learning more about this. I'm absolutely going to read more Viking sagas because this really grasped me. And I love reading them, learning more about the extra history and stuff about that, and the intricacies of their society, and how the story of Vinland developed and all that. So it was really interesting. I highly recommend this book. Yes, it is a 17 USD book for only 140 pages, but it's highly worth it. I highly recommend it. You'll get a lot out of this book, and it's got plenty of rereadability, because you could reread this and still kind of get more little intimate intricacies throughout. But yeah, this was a great book. I highly recommend it. Like I said, it's not technically considered to be a historical book, but it is highly historical because there are some discussion of the gods and stuff like that, and obviously we have some in actually the Eric the Red Saga, we see more mystical stuff going on with Gudrid, and that's obviously not historical, but it is still really interesting to see. So yeah, I would highly recommend reading this book. It gives us some great background information and just a great entrance point to learning about the early expeditions of the North America and the early settlements. Settlements. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about the Vinland Sagas the Saga of Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red Saga. And that's all we have for episode 104 of Show Reviews. Thank you very much for watching.